Alright, guidance. The paragraph specifies the parameter threshold levels required to be reported with the record of lateral resistance restraint following an inspection with a gauge resistant measurement system vehicle. The regulation required the two-level exemptions to be reported with during the gauge resistant measurement system inspection. Specification remedial actions are required at each level and identify the remedial action in the table. Section 10, first level exemption, as required immediately protected by a 10 mile an hour speed limit reduction until verification corrective action can be instituted. Second level inspection are to be monitored and maintained but within the PTLF criteria outlined in paragraph M of this section. Prior knowledge of the criteria satisfied in those locations identified with the first level, second level exemptions, the record of level lateral restraint generated following each of the gauge resistant measurement system inspection. Where the field inspection conducted with the gauge between the gauge resistant measurement system inspection reveal and an inspection location that does not comply with either the track strength requirement or the gauge requirement identified in paragraph M of this section, the inspector should consider the recommended civil penalties for location do not comply with the requirements of paragraph M and have not been identified on the record level of the restraint of the first level, second level of the exemption. The interior inspector shall exercise discretion to determine whether or not the civil penalty should be recommended. Footnote 2, the remedial action table of the section recognizes the typical ground track of the increase of the total gauge is by as much as 1/4 of an inch due to the outward rail rotation of the gauge resistant measurement system loading of the conditions. Accordingly, Class 2 and Class 3 track gauge resistant measurement system loading of the track gauge values are increased by 1/4 of an inch to a maximum of 58 inches. Gauge resistant measurement system loaded on track gauge values in excess of 58 inches must always be considered a first level exemption. The first quarter inch increase of the gauge applies to the gauge resistant measurement system load gauge that does not apply to the PTLF gauge measurement or measurements made in more traditional methods. 1110M between the gauge resistant measurement systems and the PTLF, it may be used as an additional analytical tool when assisted with the fully qualified to the statute 213.7 individuals determining compliance with the cross ties and fasteners requirements of statute 213.109 and 213.127. When the PTLF is used, whether an additional analytical tool or to fulfill the requirements of the paragraph L shall be used and subject to the following criteria. 1. At any location along the track of the PTLF is applied, but the location will be deemed compliance with the cross-tie fastener requirements specified in Statute 213.109, 213.127, provided that the total gauge of the winding location does not exceed 5/8 of an inch, increasing and applied with the force of 0 to 4,000 pounds, and the gauge of the track of the 4,000 applied with the force does not exceed the allowable gauge prescribed in Statute 213.53b for the class track. 2. The gauge widening excess of 5/8 of an inch shall constitute the deviation from Class 1 standards. A paragraph person designated with the fully qualified under Statute 213.7 retains the discretion authority to prescribe additional remedial actions of those locations which comply with the requirements of paragraph M11 and M2. M11 and 2 of this section with functional PTLFs is not available to the fully qualified person designated under Statute 213.7. The criteria to determine the cross-tie fastener compliance shall be based solely on the requirements specified in 213.109 and 213.127. The PTLF becomes a non-functional missing of the track owner replaces or repairs before the next inspection required under Statute 213.233. The vertical loading of the track necessary for the contact lateral rail of the restraint with components of the PTLF testing will be considered valid until the contact of these components are restored under the stack load conditions. Alright, while the remedial action table of the paragraph L requires the use of the PTLF measurement the compliance with lateral resistant restraint, the gauge requirements identified with the exemption of the location of the gauge resistant measurement system territory paragraph in the M that also provided the use of the PTLF as an additional analytical tool to be fully qualified with the statute 213.7 of the individuals other than the location of the gauge resistant measurement territory. The paragraph M describes the manner of which the PTLF must be used in the gauge resistant measurement system, whether being used in an additional analytical tool or being used to meet the remedial action requirements set forth in paragraph L. The compliance of the 213.109 and 213.127 Demonstrate when the PTLF is applied, the total gauge winding at the location does not exceed 5/8 of an inch, increasing an applied force to yield is 4,000 pounds. 2. The gauge of the track measured with under 4,000 pounds or applied force does not exceed the allowable gauge prescribed in statute 21353B of the section of class of the track involved with the gauge winding excess of the 5/8 of an inch shall constitute the deviation for the Class 1 standards. A location where compliance with the cross-tie rail fastener requirements have been demonstrated through the use of PTLF, the fully qualified individual will retain his discretion and authority to prescribe additional remedial actions such as placement and the speed restriction. Individual deemed necessary of the FRA inspector to determine the compliance with the cross-tie fastener requirement and for the gauge restraint solely on the basis of the PTLF movement. Measurements. Where cross-tie is found to be severe split and plate cut to the extent that they are incapable of providing adequate vertical support conditions that have been degraded with the point where the track conditions are approaching allowable limit of the cross-track class of track, the inspector shall consider writing of the defect in such a case. The use of defective code 213-109-03 cross tie is not effective to distributed to support 39-foot segment, and the track inspector shall record the track surface of geometry condition as well as the contributing condition of the cross ties and description of the column. When a functional PTLF is not available, a fully qualified statute 213.7 individual during the scheduled inspection under statute 213.233 for this part, the track owner must repair and replace the PTLF prior to the new inspection required under statute 213.233. The cross tie and the rail fastener compliance will be based solely on the requirements specified in 213.109 and 213.127. Locations where the cross tie and the rail fastening compliance with the question vertical loading of the track structure necessary to restore the contact with lateral rail restraint components of the cross tie may be rails raised to unit lateral restraint contact is restored to the and a PTLF measurement must be then made. If the track owner is immediately restore the contact between the rail and the fastening system, the valid PTLF system can be performed. Non-action will be taken in effect removing this location from the gauge-resistant measurement system standard. The inspector will determine compliance based on the 213.109 and 213.127. Likewise, the gauge rods have been installed with precluded with the PTLF test and determine the gauge-resistant cross-tie fasteners action will in effect remove the location with the gauge-resistant measurement system standard. The inspector will determine the compliance based on the 213.109 and 213.127. Alright, 110.9. Sorry, 110N. 110N. Track owner shall maintain a record of the two most gauge-resistant measurement systems inspection locations while meeting the requirements specified in statute 213.241B. The minimum record shall be indicated the following: location and the name, nature of each first level exemption, date and name of the date of remedial action. Each exemption is identified in paragraph N1 of the section. Guidance of the paragraph requires the track owner to maintain a record of the two most recent of the gauge-resistant measurement systems at location meeting with the requirements specified in 213.241B. The requirements indicate the location, nature of the first level exemption, and the nature of the date initiated the remedial action. If in any of each of the first level exemptions are described in the remedial action table in paragraph L, the record required and under paragraph N is also official record of lateral restraint needed to identify both exemption levels. However, the remedial action taken is required to be shown. Only first level exemptions required shall be maintained at the locations that meet the requirements specified in 213.241B. 110.0. The inspection intervals designated with the gauge resistant measurement system line segments shall be such at 1. On the line segments where the annual tonnage exceeds 22 million gross tons, whether the maximum operating speed of the passenger exceeds 30 miles per hour, the gauge-resistant measurement system inspection must be performed annually, the interval not exceeding 14 months. 2. On line segments, annual tonnage is 22 million gross tons or less. The maximum operating speed for the passenger train does not exceed 30 miles an hour. The interval between gauge-resistant measurement and system inspections must not exceed 24 months. Alright, guys, paragraph O details the gauge-resistant measurement system inspection requirements illustrated in the following table. Traffic. If the annual tonnage is 2 million gross, the passenger does not exceed 30 miles per hour, then the 14 months. If the 2 million gross tons or less do not exceed 30 miles an hour, and the intervals between the not exceeding 24 months. The maximum interval is 14 months, intended to provide the flexibility for scheduling the most possible scheduled annual inspection with the same calendar month in each year. The extended frequency in an attempt of making the technology more acceptable, the short line operators who have not financially equipment resources available, larger railroads, for example, the gauge-resistant measurement system inspection may be scheduled up to 24 months intervals if the railroad has 2 million annual tons or less of passenger trains were not authorized to operate at more than 30 miles an hour speed. Alright, 110P as used in this section. The gauge-resistant measurement system means tracking and loading the vehicle meeting the minimum designing requirements specified in section. Gauge widening ratio means the measure difference between the load and unloaded gauge measurements linear normalized in 16,000 pounds of applied lateral load. The load LV the LV value, load and value, LV value means a numerical ratio of lateral load applied to the point of the rail vertical load applied at the same point. The gauge resistant measurement system design requirements specify that the lateral and vertical ratio between 0.5 to 125. The gauge resistant measurement system vehicle using a load combination developing a load and lateral and vertical ratios which exceed 0.8 must be operated with caution to protect against physical risk of wheel climbing the test of the wheel set. Alright, 4. Load severity means the amount of lateral load applied to the fastener system after the friction between the rail and the tie is overcome with applied gauge widening lateral load. 5. The load track gauge means the gauge measured by the gauge resistant measurement vehicle at point no more than 12 inches of lateral load application's point. 6. Portable track loading fixture means a portable track loading device capable of applying increasing lateral force of 0 to 4,000 pounds on a web space fillet on each rail simultaneously. 7. A projected load gauge means an extrapolated value of the load gauge calculated from the actual measured loads and deflection. The projected load gauge means of 24 means exploded value of the load gauge under 24,000 pounds lateral load and 33,000 pounds vertical load. 8. Unloaded track gauge means the gauge measurement, the gauge resistant measurement system vehicle at the point no less than 10 feet at any lateral or vertical load. The paragraph prescribes the list of definitions, terms, and essential implementation of the gauge resistant measurement technology. A well-documented pattern, repeated widely spread deviation requirements of the section. The track owner will be effectively terminate the options affordable in this section. The effective track will then end subject to the requirements of statute 239-109 and 213-127. 213-113 defective rails.